Finding a wounded little bird one day, a young girl gently cradles the fragile creature in her hands. Fearing the tiny bird will die like this, the girl named Mikuru wonders aloud what she should do. Desperate for a miracle, Mikuru pleads for something to please save the dying animal. Tears welling in her eyes, she calls out to God in a moment of pure anguish. A brand new chapter of her life begins to unfold from this pivotal, emotional moment. To her utter shock, the bird suddenly takes flight, completely restored. Staring in disbelief, Mikuru questions if the wound is truly healed, whispering that there is no way this could happen. A sudden voice calls out Mikuru's name, breaking her stunned silence. Surrounding her, the other children recoil in terror, demanding to know what she just did. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Mikuru stammers as the terrifying truth dawns on her. The children reject her out of fear, crying out that they are scared of her and warning her to stay away because she is creepy. Left completely alone, Mikuru watches the others flee from her strange, unexplained power. From that day forward, the young girl realizes she is hated by everyone around her. Locking herself away, Mikuru sobs uncontrollably in her room while her anxious family stands helplessly outside the door. Her worried parents gently ask if she is okay, begging her to come out and eat at least something. Even her little brother tries to comfort her, softly asking his big sister to cheer up. Despite their heartfelt pleas, Mikuru remains trapped in her own despair, tears streaming down her face. Outside her sanctuary, the bustling manor staff rudely push past one another, yelling at others to move out of the way. Suddenly, her imposing but elegant grandmother arrives on the chaotic scene. Explaining that she flew over because she felt worried, the grandmother gently asks Mikuru what she is doing hiding away. Standing tall and composed, the grandmother looks upon the distressed young girl with a deeply compassionate gaze. She instructs Mikuru to listen, noting that she has already heard everything that happened. The grandmother reveals that this mysterious ability bears the name of the White Blessing. She explains that it remains a profound, mysterious power that miraculously heals sickness and injuries. Visions of the miraculous healing energy flash through Mikuru's mind as the reality sets in. Clutching her chest in agony, Mikuru cries out that she absolutely doesn't want this kind of frightening power. Her grandmother immediately comforts her, explaining that she doesn't have to hate such a wonderful power that only she possesses. Tears still falling freely, Mikuru tearfully confesses how much she hates herself for being so different. Understanding her immense pain, the grandmother acknowledges that it must be a little hard to live with such a burden. Offering a sudden glimmer of hope, she promises to perform a special spell just for Mikuru. Mikuru looks up with wide, tear-filled eyes, surprised by her grandmother's unexpected offer. The grandmother gently takes the young girl's hand, placing a beautifully woven bracelet around her fragile wrist. Chanting mystical words, the grandmother casts a spell, praying aloud that Mikuru may finally come to love herself. Still slightly confused by the magic, Mikuru admits she doesn't really get how the spell is supposed to work. Her grandmother smiles warmly, reminding her that it acts simply as a spell after all. However, her tone shifts slightly as she challenges Mikuru, asking if she is really going to keep worrying everyone like this forever. To help her bear the heavy burden, the grandmother offers her a protective oration to carry going forward. She warns Mikuru that because this power exists as something ordinary people don't have, she absolutely mustn't use it in front of others. Looking her directly in the eye, the grandmother firmly instructs her to only use it when she truly wants to help someone, without hesitation. Seeing her grandmother's reassuring smile, Mikuru finally agrees, whispering a hesitant but hopeful okay to the new rules. Reflecting on the past, a somber realization dawns that her beloved grandmother passed away 5 long years ago. The 16-year-old daughter of the Roar Baron family, Mikuru Roar, sits quietly with her lingering thoughts. Waking from a nostalgic dream, Mikuru remembers her grandmother as a local lord's descendant skilled in fortune-telling and magical spells. She gazes fondly at her woven talisman, recalling that the powerful oration serves as one of those spell-crafted items imbued with heartfelt wishes. Holding the charm tight, she remembers the legend stating it will naturally break off the day her deepest wish finally comes true. Honoring the sacred promise made to her grandmother, Mikuru has spent her entire life carefully avoiding the use of her mysterious white blessing. Stretching her arms wide, the young girl readies herself for the day and confidently declares that her current efforts should be enough. Suddenly, a series of heavy, purposeful knocks echoes through the solid wooden door of her room. Opening the door, she finds her stern but deeply loving father standing in the hallway waiting for her. Her father gently gestures for her to take a seat, prompting Mikuru to acknowledge that she heard he needed to speak with her. With a heavy sigh, he confirms her rising suspicions, admitting that there is indeed a serious matter they must discuss. He reveals the involvement of Lord Alvis, the heir to the House of Levon Marquis, a renowned martial artist currently serving in the Royal Army. Shock blasts through Mikuru as she realizes this unexpected conversation centers around a marriage proposal explicitly meant for her. Trembling with anxiety, she stammers her reservations about marrying a total stranger while her father sincerely apologizes for the abruptness. The crushing reality sets in as her father explains the sheer danger of refusing an offer from the vastly superior Marquis house. Rendered utterly speechless, Mikuru stares in wide-eyed disbelief at the heavy burden suddenly placed upon her fragile shoulders. Resigning to their grim fate, her father reminds her that securing power and safety remains the original purpose behind all noble marriages. A wave of sorrow washes over Mikuru as she realizes her personal feelings mean absolutely nothing compared to the vital connection between their families. Swallowing her deep-seated fear, she bravely accepts the proposal, prompting a surprised and deeply moved reaction from her father. Offering a reassuring smile, she comforts her father even as he bitterly apologizes for lacking the power to protect her. Heavy silence fills the tense room as the crushing weight of the sudden engagement completely settles over both father and daughter. Whispers begin to spread like wildfire through the manor halls as the servants gossip endlessly about the young lady's shocking engagement. The staff quietly discuss the harsh truth, revealing that the sudden union serves strictly as a political maneuver to secure vital support from the Levon family. Overhearing the hushed chatter, Mikuru processes the cold, calculated nature of her upcoming marriage with a heavy heart. She reflects on the Roar territory's dangerous border location, which constantly drains their limited resources for mercenaries and fort repairs. Knowing the endless military expenses, she acknowledges that her noble family never truly possessed any kind of financial leeway. Determination hardening her features, Mikuru resolves to do whatever she can, knowing the Levon family's immense aid will ultimately save her home. Suddenly, a chilling rumor cuts through her fierce resolve as a servant questions the terrifying reputation of the Marquis' son. Horrifying tales recount Lord Alvis subduing wild horses with a single glare, crushing bears barehanded, and routing 20 men in a lance tournament. Paralyzed by the monstrous stories, Mikuru trembles violently as the sheer terror of meeting her future husband firmly grips her heart. Trying to maintain her composure, she desperately clings to the faint hope that the monstrous rumors serve only as wild exaggerations. Forcing a bright smile, she loudly convinces herself that everything will turn out fine once they actually sit down and talk. Meanwhile, in a grander and much more imposing estate, the looming shadow of her dreaded fiancé makes his formidable first appearance. The towering 20-year-old heir to the Levon Marquis family, Alvis Levon, sharply questions the sudden news of an unexpected engagement. A commanding authority figure explains his ruthless strategy, aiming to secure vital assets long before any rival factions can make a move. Alvis demands to know why they chose such a remote house, prompting the revelation that the Roar family controls a key strategic choke point against the neighboring country. The authority figure confirms the target remains the Roar family, ordering Alvis to prepare for a formal meeting by the end of the month. Unveiling the true plot, he explains that the engagement serves merely as a convenient cover to funnel resources without drawing dangerous enemy scrutiny. Analyzing the tactical situation, Alvis expresses his genuine surprise that the proud Roar family actually surrendered to such a demanding proposal. A dark smirk crosses his superior's face as he admits to applying crushing pressure, utterly disregarding how precious the daughter might be to her helpless family. Listening to a ruthless command, the imposing heir absorbs his father's strict order to secure this strategic marriage at all costs. Bowing his head in grim resignation, the loyal son whispers his compliance to the harsh patriarch. Staring coldly ahead, Alvis processes the name Mikuru with a heavy sigh. Pitying the unknown girl, he bitterly acknowledges she is just another unfortunate soul trapped in a hollow connection. Foreshadowing a cruel fate, he mutters the grim possibility of divorcing her once she outlives her strategic purpose. Clenching his jaw, the hardened heir curses his father for treating his own flesh and blood as a disposable pawn. Brooding in the quiet shadows, Alvis grapples with the suffocating weight of his noble obligations. Sighing deeply, the troubled young man openly admits just how incredibly bothersome this entire arrangement has suddenly become. Analyzing his cold reality, he considers telling his new bride to take a lover instead to ease this political marriage. Dismissing the need for intimacy, he calculates that adopting an heir remains a perfectly viable option for their bloodline. A few days later, a grand carriage rolls majestically toward the sprawling, vibrant streets of the royal capital. Rumbling through the stone-paved streets, the opulent carriage carries the young bride toward her uncertain future. Sitting nervously inside, Lady Mikuru receives polite word from her escort that they will be arriving very soon. Towering against the sky, the magnificent Levon Marquis mansion commands absolute awe with its breathtaking architecture. Staring in pure wonder, Mikuru marvels at the massive estate just as a servant points out young Master Alvis. Catching her breath, the nervous girl freezes for a split second as she prepares for her very first introduction. Gathering her courage, she introduces herself as Mikuru Roar with an incredibly bright and enthusiastic greeting. Standing tall and utterly stoic, the imposing heir simply states his name is Alvis. Blushing furiously, Mikuru stares up at her new fiancé, completely mesmerized by his striking presence. Dismissing her instantly, Alvis coldly declares he is busy, leaving the starry-eyed girl marveling at how wonderful he seems. Guiding the awestruck bride through the lavish halls, a servant politely directs Lady Mikuru toward her new personal chambers. Admiring her lovely new room, she clenches her fists with fierce determination and promises to do her absolute best. Seeking him out later, her hopeful visit ends in bitter disappointment when a maid reveals the young master has not returned. Sitting alone at a grand dining table, she learns he will be late again due to his endless piles of work. Waking up early the next morning, her eager search is crushed once more upon hearing he has already left. Pacing frantically, an anxious Mikuru realizes with growing panic that she hasn't met Lord Alvis even a single time. Slumping forward in utter defeat, the isolated bride feels the crushing weight of loneliness closing in around her. Hot tears threaten to spill from her eyes as the agonizing reality of her complete isolation finally takes its toll. Staring blankly ahead, she sadly questions if this miserable separation is truly what a political marriage is like. Shaking her head fiercely, the resilient girl quickly slaps her cheeks to banish the dark and depressing thoughts. Refusing to surrender to despair, she loudly declares it is too early to give up and vows to wait up tomorrow. Later that dark evening, the heavy front doors creak open as an exhausted Alvis finally returns home. Heavy footsteps echo through the dim, silent foyer as the towering heir steps out of the evening shadows. Startling him in the dark, a determined Mikuru brightly welcomes her husband back to the mansion. Stopping dead in his tracks, Alvis shoots her a sharp, utterly bewildered glare. Explaining she waited up to share a meal, she cowers slightly as he demands to know why she is awake at midnight. A suffocating silence crashes down between them as his piercing stare violently pierces through her fragile hope. Standing motionless, the terrifying heir glares down at his trembling bride without uttering a single word. Shattering the quiet tension, he cruelly demands to know exactly who asked her to do such a foolish thing. Crushing her heart completely, Alvis glares at the stunned girl and coldly declares that she is nothing but a bother. Reeling from the brutal rejection, Mikuru watches helplessly as the imposing heir turns his back on her. Left completely alone in the freezing hallway, the heartbroken bride trembles under the weight of his cruel dismissal. Hot tears spill from her wide eyes as the agonizing reality of her deep isolation finally shatters her composure. Bowing her head in deep shame, she tearfully whispers a soft apology to the empty, uncaring heir. Wiping her damp cheeks, the resilient young girl tries desperately to gather her fractured resolve. A terrifying thought pierces her grief as she frantically wonders what will happen to the Roar family if she cowardly flees. Her chest tightens in pure terror at the bleak, unforgiving fate awaiting her beloved father and her vulnerable people. Clenching her tiny fists with fierce determination, Mikuru accepts that she possesses absolutely no choice but to stay. Bracing her spirit against the cold rejection, she accepts her difficult path even if it remains a loveless political marriage. A fiery spark of defiant courage powerfully ignites within the fragile girl as she vows to keep fighting for her home. Squaring her trembling shoulders, she marches bravely forward with a renewed purpose to melt her icy husband's heart. Driven by pure devotion, she passionately dreams of building a warm, loving family just like her father's. Overcoming her intense embarrassment, she secretly takes over the daunting duty of delivering the heir's late-night meal. Gathering her courage outside his heavy door, she knocks gently and apologizes for bothering him again with the food. A heavy, suffocating silence answers her polite knocking as absolutely no one stirs within the dark, imposing room. Whispering a soft pardon, the nervous bride slowly turns the heavy brass doorknob and slips quietly inside. Stepping cautiously into the shadowy office, her anxious eyes scan the massive space, searching for the towering master. Her breath catches sharply in her throat as she spots Alvis slumped heavily over his massive wooden desk. Relieved and thoroughly surprised, she realizes the terrifying young master has completely fallen asleep amidst his endless paperwork. Creeping closer on silent feet, Mikuru carefully approaches the slumbering giant without making a single sound. Gazing at his exhausted form, she deeply sympathizes with the immense burden of him working so incredibly late every single day. Quickly grabbing a warm blanket, she gently drapes the soft fabric over his broad, shivering shoulders. Watching his chest rhythmically rise and fall, a deep wave of compassion washes over her as his sheer exhaustion becomes obvious. Staring intently at his deeply furrowed brow, she quietly wonders why the young master always wears such a harshly stern expression. A tender curiosity beautifully blooms in her heart as she desperately wonders what face he makes when he actually smiles. Whispering her secret magical spell, she chants Topica and Rim while desperately wishing to know more about the mysterious Lord Alvis. Pouring her entire soul into the forbidden magic, she begs the spell to please make him come to like her. Snapping violently out of her magical trance, Mikuru covers her burning face in sheer panic upon realizing what she just cast. Driven by intense, overwhelming embarrassment, the flustered bride spins on her heels and bolts toward the heavy oak doors. Fleeing the embarrassing scene entirely, she slams the door shut behind her in a frantic, desperate escape. Sprinting frantically down the dim hallway, the flustered girl lets out a tiny, high-pitched squeal of utter mortification. In the silent, empty office, the imposing heir's sharp eyes suddenly snap wide open in the darkness. Shifting his massive frame, Alvis slowly sits up and stares completely stunned at the heavy door she just fled through. Feeling the warm blanket gently draped over his shoulders, the stoic master fully processes the sudden, bizarre encounter. A wildly rare look of complete and utter bewilderment vividly crosses his usually hardened, unreadable features. Mentally cursing the absurd situation, he furiously wonders what the hell just happened as he merely planned to rest for a bit. Having pretended to sleep to avoid a troublesome conversation, he violently reels from hearing her cast a desperate spell for his affection. A creeping flush of intense heat violently invades the imposing heir's cheeks as her sweet words continuously echo in his mind. Covering his blushing face with a massive hand, the mighty Lord Alvis completely short-circuits from the sheer, overwhelming embarrassment. Desperately analyzing the encounter, he frantically reassures his racing heart that the fleeing girl absolutely didn't realize he remained awake the entire time. Recognizing the chanted words Rim, Rem, and Topica as a traditional incantation from the Roar territory, an astounded Alvis questions if she is truly serious. Reeling from the absurd revelation, the imposing heir finds it completely unbelievable that she cares so deeply about a simple political marriage. Frowning in the darkness, he firmly believes the young bride should rightfully hate him instead of desperately wishing for his affection. A dark memory suddenly flashes through his mind, harshly warning the young noble to never let his guard down. His ruthless father's voice violently echoes in his thoughts, threatening that he will become a useless pawn if he fails to prove his absolute value. Staring blankly at his wooden desk, Alvis silently wrestles with the crushing weight of his strict noble obligations. Analyzing the precarious political situation, the young master decides he absolutely cannot afford to worsen relations with the powerful Roar family. Reluctantly recalling her earlier invitation, he strategically determines it is best to simply go along with the girl's request to share a meal. Sighing heavily into the quiet room, the exhausted heir closes his eyes and fully resigns himself to this troublesome new plan. Steeling his absolute resolve, Alvis prepares to face his newly minted fiancée the following morning. Meanwhile, in her own lavish bedroom, a deeply troubled Mikuru tosses and turns under the heavy blankets. The forbidden magical words Topica, Rem, and Rim violently echo in her mind as she recalls casting the secret spell. Remembering her desperate plea for him to like her, a creeping sense of utter dread begins to consume the young bride. Shooting straight up in bed, she clutches her face in sheer horror upon fully realizing what she boldly chanted the night before. Violently blushing with intense shame, Mikuru finds the fresh memory far too humiliating to even process. Forcing a bright and polite smile the next morning, she desperately tries to convince herself that it was merely a harmless spell after all. Shattering her fragile peace, the towering Lord Alvis suddenly greets her with an incredibly warm and unexpected good morning. Whipping her head around in pure shock, Mikuru violently flinches at the sound of his deep voice. Frantically waving her hands in a total panic, the flustered bride nervously stammers that absolutely nothing is wrong. Screaming internally, she stares at the imposing air and wildly questions why Lord Alvis is casually standing right in front of her. A heavy bead of nervous sweat drops down her pale face as she struggles to comprehend the impossible situation. Gasping softly, Mikuru freezes completely as her wide eyes lock onto his unusually calm expression. Desperately calculating his strict schedule, she realizes in sheer panic that the busy master should have already left for work. Igniting a fierce blush across her cheeks, Alvis smoothly admits he intentionally waited just to see her lovely face before leaving. Staring intently at her flustered form, he teasingly points out that she is certainly taking her morning very reasonably. Trembling under his intense gaze, a completely overwhelmed Mikuru frantically wonders what in the world she should do next. Unwavering and stoic, the towering heir continues to observe his trembling fiancée with a deeply calculating stare. Completely misreading the situation, Mikuru stares in utter disbelief, violently assuming her forbidden love spell actually worked. Hiding his own intense embarrassment, a secretly groaning Alvis mentally admits he is merely pretending to be under the spell's magical influence. Sweating profusely under the pressure of his own massive lie, the conflicted noble desperately questions if faking this affection is truly the right choice. Trapped in their own massive misunderstandings, both nobles sit in agonizing mental turmoil wondering what exactly they should do. A suffocating blanket of heavy tension completely smothers the grand dining room as they awkwardly prepare to share breakfast. Thrust into a web of absolute deceit, the incredibly awkward cohabitation between the two terrified nobles officially begins. Hanging in the balance, the looming question remains whether this chaotic couple will actually manage to successfully finalize their engagement. Shattering the thick silence, Alvis calmly suggests they eat, prompting a hyper-nervous Mikuru to immediately agree. They sit together in total silence, the massive dining table stretching endlessly between the two conflicted youths. Preparing to finally depart for his royal duties, Alvis calls her name gently and formally announces he is heading out. Bowing her head with a soft, lingering blush, Mikuru sweetly wishes her intimidating husband a very good day. Heavy footsteps echo against the marble floor as the towering heir confidently walks out the grand mansion doors. Clutching her wildly pounding chest, an utterly exhausted Mikuru lets out a heavy sigh and whispers that her fragile heart simply cannot take this. Trembling in disbelief at the sudden change, Mikuru realizes the forbidden love spell's effect is far too strong. A dark and imposing silhouette of the terrifying heir completely shatters into a bright, warmly smiling visage. Staring intently at his gentle face, the overwhelmed bride acknowledges everything changed since the day she cast the magic. Clutching her rapidly beating heart, Mikuru stares wide-eyed as she thinks Lord Alvis acts like a completely different person. Vivid memories flash of them sharing warm breakfasts and dinners while he cheerfully greets her first thing every morning. Leaning in with a strikingly gentle expression, the once fearsome heir smoothly asks if there is anything his new bride desires. Completely caught off guard by his sudden generosity, Mikuru gasps softly and utters a confused sound of pure bewilderment. Smiling warmly, Alvis politely insists on giving her something to cover any expenses she might have after just arriving. Waving her hands frantically in a total panic, the deeply flustered girl loudly refuses his extravagant financial offer. Blushing furiously under his intense doting, she nervously admits this overwhelming affection has gone beyond happiness and become slightly scary. Lowering her gaze with a heavy, solemn expression, the conflicted bride mutters a quiet hesitation about her current situation. Gazing wistfully out the grand arched window, Mikuru stares up at the vast, clear sky while wrestling with her deep guilt. Clenching her tiny fists in deep frustration, she painfully reminds herself that all of this wonderful affection is an illusion. Attributing his kindness strictly to the spell's power, she suddenly snaps back to reality upon remembering a pending letter from her father. Turning her back on the bright window, the determined young girl briskly walks down the quiet, shadowed manor hallway. A heavy wave of sorrow washes over her face as she silently vows that someday she must break the magical enchantment. Transitioning far from the quiet mansion, massive stone walls surround the bustling and intense royal army training grounds. Fierce combat erupts across the dirt courtyard as armored knights violently clash their heavy steel swords in rigorous sparring. Sparks fly as crossing blades lock in a brutal struggle of raw physical strength and deafening martial shouts. Shattering the intense combat tension, a commanding knight loudly declares a sudden break time for the exhausted soldiers. Sweat pouring down his intensely focused face, a heavily panting Alvis catches his breath after the grueling physical session. Approaching the exhausted noble, a friendly fellow knight casually praises the mighty heir for working so incredibly hard. Wiping the sweat from his brow, Alvis looks up and instantly recognizes his grinning comrade as the knight Ricardo. Ricardo teasingly points out that the legendary work demon has been leaving shockingly early because he claims there is no urgent work. Flashing a knowing smirk, Ricardo sharply accuses Alvis of desperately wanting to rush home to his beloved new fiancée. A fierce blush violently explodes across Alvis's cheeks as he stammers an embarrassed apology while Ricardo loudly laughs at their new cohabitation. Slumping forward in utter defeat, the towering and fearsome Lord Alvis lets out a dramatically heavy, exhausted sigh. Surrounded by a gloomy, depressing aura, the imposing heir tragically confesses he has absolutely no idea how to interact with her. Raising an inquisitive eyebrow, a highly surprised Ricardo asks if this mysterious bride is truly such a difficult young lady. Shooting his friend a sharp glare, Alvis immediately denies the accusation before softly reconsidering his exact wording. Lost in a beautiful daydream, he fondly recalls the sheer radiance of her sweet face whenever he greets her in the morning. A stunning vision of Mikuru smiling as brightly and perfectly as a blooming flower completely overtakes his smitten mind. He passionately describes how she always seems so incredibly happy just sitting across from him during their quiet, shared meals. Remembering his desperate attempt to spoil her, he recalls how she frantically declined when he asked if she wanted anything. A soft, angelic glow surrounds his memory of Mikuru as she sweetly and modestly whispered her only true desire. Her purely innocent face flashes before his eyes as she admits that simply having meals with him is completely enough. Clutching his flushed face in utter despair, the completely overwhelmed heir wildly wonders how to please a girl with zero materialistic desires. Staring utterly blank-faced at his friend's intense, love-struck rambling, Ricardo silently processes the sheer absurdity of the fearsome demon's dilemma. Sweat dropping at the pure wholesomeness of it all, Ricardo mutters in pure disbelief over a bride who solely desires to eat together. Offering a simple piece of romantic advice, Ricardo casually suggests sending the sweet girl some beautiful flowers for starters. Recalling a joyful memory with immense fondness, a cheerful blonde youth animatedly explains how incredibly happy his little sister was when he thoughtfully sent her a birthday gift. Contemplating the inspiring idea deeply, the dark-haired Alvis narrows his sharp eyes in quiet realization as the notion of giving flowers crosses his calculating mind. Caught entirely off guard by a sudden, jarring revelation, a fractured chain of hesitant thoughts and stuttered words cascade through the unexpected moment of profound surprise. Lingering helplessly in a state of mild, unresolved uncertainty, the quiet and somewhat confused affirmation hangs tentatively in the heavy air. Resolving immediately to make an earnest, dedicated attempt, a determined gaze signals a steadfast commitment to do whatever is within his considerable power. Greeting him with an unwaveringly bright and genuinely innocent smile, the beautiful young girl warmly welcomes young Master Alvis back to the grand estate. Utter shock completely overtakes her delicate features as a massive, breathtakingly arranged bouquet of blooming sunflowers and lush roses is suddenly thrust into her view. Radiating a charmingly triumphant aura, Alvis playfully brushes off her utter bewilderment as he casually presents the magnificent, sparkling floral arrangement. With dynamic, explosive energy tearing across the visual plane, an emphatic, frustrated declaration forcefully slices through her lingering, innocent confusion. Gently dispelling her worry that it isn't her actual birthday, he earnestly confesses that he simply wanted to give them to her and hopes she genuinely likes them. A subtle, deeply vulnerable breath escapes Alvis as he awaits her verdict, his normally composed aristocratic facade cracking slightly under the immense weight of romantic anticipation. Clutching the vibrant, heavy bouquet tightly to her chest, her eyes sparkle with overwhelming, pure joy as she passionately expresses her deep, heartfelt gratitude. Internalizing the lingering remnants of past doubt, a complex web of cautious yet profoundly hopeful thoughts swirls vividly within her anxious mind. Brushing aside the dark, lingering anxieties of her thoughts, a quiet sense of reassurance settles over the scene, confirming that everything will ultimately be absolutely fine. Carefully bringing the beautiful blooms indoors, she elegantly arranges the vibrant flowers on a small wooden table within the opulent, meticulously decorated room. Gazing fondly at the magnificent floral display, she reflects with a warmly swelling heart on how consistently and deeply generous Alvis has always been towards her. Weighed down heavily by her strict inability to simply use the Levon family's vast wealth, a deep, burning desire to offer something meaningful in return takes firm root in her soul. Quiet frustration lightly tinges her delicate expression as she laments her severe lack of personal resources, wishing desperately she had something inherently valuable on hand. Suddenly, a brilliant, electrifying spark of inspiration flashes vividly within her wide, expressive eye as her hand raises in a moment of quiet, sudden realization. Triumphantly piecing the emotional puzzle together, a radiant burst of energy surrounds her as the absolute perfect idea finally crystallizes in her bright, racing mind. Following a brief, quiet passage of time, the grand, imposing architecture of the estate stands majestic and silent against the beautifully passing days. Politely interrupting his swift, purposeful departure, she nervously requests just a fleeting, precious moment of his incredibly valuable time. With a gentle but highly specific instruction, she earnestly asks the imposing young master to extend his left hand directly toward her. Glancing sharply over his heavily adorned shoulder, Alvis halts his exit entirely as her urgent, sweet voice echoes gracefully through the grand, sunlit hallway. Delicately presenting the handmade, deeply personal offering, a beautifully woven, beaded bracelet emerges softly into the illuminating, natural light. Stepping intimately close to the towering noble, she gently grasps his gloved wrist to carefully and tenderly secure the intricate, meaningful band. With a bright, earnest expression lighting up her face, she introduces the precious item as an oration, a highly protective, traditional talisman native to the rugged Roar territory. Her voice softening with profound, genuine concern, she explains that she painstakingly crafted it to keep him eternally safe from the violent, unforgiving dangers of the battlefield. The beautifully carved focal stone of the talisman rests heavily upon his open palm, symbolizing an immense, undeniable weight of heartfelt care and quiet devotion. Dark, heavy shadows obscure Alvis's unreadable eyes as he silently, intensely stares down at the humble charm now adorning his grand, imposing military uniform. Blinding panic suddenly grips her fragile composure as she stammers a frantic apology, terrified that her humble reciprocal gift for the beautiful flowers has profoundly disappointed him. Lifting his gaze slowly, a breathtakingly tender and completely uncharacteristic smile graces his striking aristocratic features as he softly, warmly denies her anxious fears. The heavy, ornate iron gates of the grand estate part with a resounding clatter, allowing a majestic, enclosed carriage to begin its solemn journey down the sprawling path. Leaving behind a vow of profound, unshakable sincerity, his quiet parting words echo with a solemn promise to cherish and protect the sentimental charm forever. Reflecting quietly on his departure, she realizes with a wildly stirring heart that his parting smile held a uniquely deep, rare, and entirely unprecedented warmth. Standing beautifully in the radiant, dappled light, the young girl offers a serene, incredibly hopeful wave goodbye, trusting fully in his safe and undeniably victorious return. The lingering, powerful emotional resonance of their intimate, unforgettable exchange hangs thickly in the quiet, undisturbed air of the estate. The rhythmic, mechanical, and heavy clatter of the departing carriage wheels sharply pierces the otherwise tranquil, perfectly still atmosphere. Safely and flawlessly secured around his strong wrist, the woven talisman rests firmly against his sleeve, serving as a constant, tangible physical reminder of her unwavering affection. Seated quietly within the dim, swaying confines of the moving carriage, Alvis affectionately cradles his newly adorned arm, guarding the precious gift with absolute, silent reverence. A harsh, booming voice slices through the tense air, brutally demanding to know how long the fallen boy plans to stay down. Barking in uncompromising order, his stern father demands he quickly grab his sword and resume the grueling battle immediately. Cowering slightly beneath the immense pressure, young Alvis desperately points out the fresh blood streaming from his deeply injured arm. Disregarding the agonizing pain completely, his terrifying father cruelly roars that such minor physical injuries absolutely do not matter. Furiously reprimanding the battered boy, the massive patriarch questions his fundamental worthiness as the Levon heir if he cries over a simple wound. Whispering maliciously behind closed doors, the estate servants gossip coldly about young Master Alvis's glaring, undeniable physical weakness. Dark rumors swirl rapidly through the grand halls, suggesting the family might actually adopt a stronger replacement heir to permanently supplant the frail boy. Pushing forcefully past his agonizing physical limits, the exhausted young noble heavily swings his heavy training sword with sheer, desperate resolve. Dodging a fierce incoming strike, a harsh instructor mercilessly commands him never to let his guard down in a real life-or-death fight. Consumed entirely by dark anxiety, Alvis realizes with grim certainty that he must endlessly prove his absolute value or face immediate, permanent discard. Dedicating his entire fragile existence to a cold duty, he swears to sacrifice absolutely everything for the martial glory of the Levon family. Forcing down his innate human frailty, he mentally chants that painful injuries mean absolutely nothing if it ultimately pleases his demanding father. A burning, desperate obsession ignites within his battered soul as he demands infinitely more brutal strength and relentless effort from his trembling body. Pushing his exhausted physical form far beyond the breaking point, he violently commands his shivering muscles to endure even more horrific suffering. Suddenly, a tender, recent memory pierces sharply through the suffocating darkness, echoing her gentle, heartfelt wish to keep him eternally safe from harm. Jolting violently awake from the oppressive nightmare, Alvis stares blankly forward as the cold reality of his quiet, empty room finally sets in. Glancing thoughtfully downward, the intricate woven talisman secured tightly to his wrist catches his sharp, analytical eye in the dim, shifting moonlight. Tracing the smooth beads with careful, quiet reverence, a complex wave of entirely unfamiliar emotion momentarily softens his deeply hardened, icy gaze. Snapping violently back to his rigid, lifelong discipline, he firmly rejects the dangerous emotional vulnerability threatening to melt his carefully constructed heart. Reminding his conscious mind of his inescapable reality, he coldly categorizes their young marriage as a mere political obligation specifically for the Levon heir. Desperately guarding his fragile internal walls, he strictly insists to himself that his warm reactions are merely calculated acting to match her supposed spell. Meanwhile, holding a delicate, steaming cup of freshly brewed tea, his bright young bride cheerfully prepares for her next thoughtful late-night visit. Blushing deeply with pure, radiant joy, she warmly recalls how breathtakingly beautiful his rare, genuine smile truly was during their last intimate encounter. Heavy, suffocating guilt unexpectedly anchors her bright spirit as she mistakenly assumes his sweet affection was forcefully manufactured by her accidental magic. Tapping gently on his heavy, solid oak door, she firmly resolves to break the lingering enchantment and completely restore his absolute free will. Creeping cautiously into the sprawling, silent room, she peeks her head inside after receiving absolutely no answer to her gentle, hesitant knocks. Whispering a polite, incredibly nervous apology to the empty air, she carefully navigates the sprawling, dimly lit confines of the master bedchamber. Spotting his unmoving, slumped form draped haphazardly over the wooden desk, she realizes with soft surprise that the exhausted noble has fallen fast asleep. Tiptoeing silently closer to the imposing young master, she carefully observes his peaceful, thoroughly unguarded expression resting against the scattered, messy paperwork. Seizing the perfect, quiet opportunity, she nervously prepares to chant the highly complex incantation required to completely undo her supposed love spell. Taking a deep, remarkably shaky breath, she softly whispers the very first crucial syllable of the mystical, highly secretive reversal charm. Shrieking in sudden, absolute terror, her pounding heart nearly leaps completely from her chest as a strong, gloved hand suddenly shoots out. Gasping deeply in breathless shock, her wide, panicked eyes lock intensely with Alvis's dark gaze as he abruptly awakens from his deceptive slumber. Demanding immediate, coherent answers, Alvis sharply questions her highly suspicious magical actions with a piercing, deeply intense glare. Stumbling awkwardly backward in sheer, unadulterated panic, she scrambles frantically to find a highly believable excuse for her midnight magical trespassing. Waving her hands wildly in the cold air, she blurts out a terrible, completely unconvincing lie in a desperate attempt to cover up her true intentions. Sprinting frantically out of the oppressive room, she barely escapes the suffocating, heavy tension of the incredibly awkward, pulse-pounding midnight encounter. Slumping heavily back into his solid wooden chair, a thoroughly bewildered Alvis incorrectly assumes she was maliciously attempting to cast yet another devious enchantment. Nodding slowly in grim, self-assured satisfaction, he proudly praises his own razor-sharp reflexes for successfully thwarting her supposed magical assault. Sighing heavily into the suffocating, oppressive silence, he deeply dreads whatever bizarre, unpredictable magical antics his highly eccentric bride will attempt next. Shimmering softly in the quiet morning light, a gentle array of magical sparkles dances delicately through the tranquil air. The peaceful silence stretches out heavily in the calm room, holding the lingering, anxious tension of the awkward night before. Groaning softly under her breath, the young bride wrestles quietly with her profound, highly complicated inner turmoil. Letting out a heavy, utterly defeated sigh, she slumps visibly as the sheer weight of her midnight mistake settles over her. Burying her deeply flushed face in her delicate hands, she laments her absolute failure to properly execute the magical reversal. Panicking wildly about her increasingly complicated future, she dreads the undeniable fact that her supposedly spellbound married life must now continue indefinitely. Sunlight streams warmly across the elegant dining table as a beautifully prepared, highly elaborate breakfast awaits the young noble couple. The quiet clatter of fine silverware against porcelain lightly breaks the slightly tense atmosphere of their shared morning meal. Agonizing internally over her disastrous midnight attempt, she angrily scolds herself for completely failing to break the imaginary enchantment. Clenching her fists with renewed, quiet determination, she mentally vows to find another perfect opportunity to quickly undo the lingering spell. Noting her uncharacteristically relaxed pace, Alvis gently observes her lingering thoughtfully over an unexpected second cup of hot coffee. Taking a calm, elegant sip from his delicate porcelain cup, Alvis casually reveals that he is completely off duty for the entire day. Her bright eyes widen considerably in sudden, genuine surprise as she slowly processes his highly unexpected day of total leisure. Leaning forward with a surprisingly gentle demeanor, the handsome young master smoothly offers to personally guide her around the grand royal capital. Stuttering nervously in pure, unadulterated disbelief, she frantically questions if he is truly willing to dedicate his precious free time to her. A massive, overwhelming blush violently explodes across her delicate cheeks as she suddenly realizes this outing is essentially a romantic date. Striding gracefully through the ornate, sunlit halls, Alvis maintains his perfectly composed exterior while quietly wrestling with his own sudden nerves. Mentally kicking himself for his unprecedented impulsivity, Alvis anxiously reflects on how he carelessly invited her out on a spur-of-the-moment whim. A vivid flashback violently rips through his mind, recalling a loud comrade mocking his complete lack of romantic dating experience. Remembering his own defensive confusion, he recalls his friend forcefully insisting that absolutely never taking his bride out was a genuinely terrible idea. Dismissing his past cynical doubts, the loud comrade's exasperated advice to simply ask her out violently echoes in Alvis's racing mind. A sweet, incredibly nervous voice suddenly slices through his frantic internal monologue, softly apologizing for keeping him waiting. Turning sharply on his polished leather heel, the young noble stops completely in his tracks as his breath catches slightly. Stepping shyly into the bright, natural light, his beautiful young bride stands radiantly in a stunning, meticulously crafted casual dress. Absolute, stunned silence heavily overtakes the typically articulate Alvis as he wordlessly absorbs her breathtakingly beautiful appearance. Fidgeting anxiously with the delicate hem of her flowing skirt, she nervously asks if her carefully chosen outfit somehow looks strange. Stumbling awkwardly over his normally precise words, a heavily flustered Alvis quickly stammers that she absolutely does not look weird. Panic violently grips his analytical mind as he abruptly remembers he must convincingly act like a deeply spellbound, hopelessly smitten husband. Steeling his fiercely racing heart, the young master slowly forces himself to look directly into her wide, incredibly anxious eyes. Delivering the heartfelt compliment with a surprisingly tender flush, he softly admits that he thinks she looks incredibly cute. Hearing his unbelievably sweet praise, a massive, radiant wave of pure red heat instantly violently overtakes her entirely shocked face. Desperately hiding his own raging embarrassment, Alvis quickly pivots toward the massive door as she eagerly, happily agrees to depart. The ornate, heavily gilded family carriage rolls smoothly out of the grand estate, carrying the nervously excited couple toward the bustling city. Arriving safely at the vibrant, sun-drenched fountain square, a massive, brilliantly sparkling water feature heavily dominates the wildly crowded plaza. Gazing out in absolute, wide-eyed wonder, She joyfully marvels at the sheer, overwhelming liveliness of the bustling, wildly energetic capital city. Countless busy merchants and brightly dressed townsfolk hurriedly weave through the busy, loudly echoing cobblestone streets of the expansive royal capital. A charismatic, brightly clothed street performer loudly attempts to catch her fascinated attention with an impressively flashy, highly colorful magic trick. Watching the highly impressive illusion with childlike amazement, she completely fails to notice the incredibly simple secret behind the flashy street trick. Standing in quiet, reverent awe, the young couple closely admires the stunning, soaring architecture during their incredibly peaceful cathedral sightseeing tour. Happily continuing their wonderful, immensely romantic excursion, they eagerly dive into a highly flavorful, completely delightful street food tour. Encouraging her warmly, the cheerful shopkeeper kindly suggests the young lady try on the stunning, delicate hair accessory. Blushing deeply at the highly enthusiastic praise, she shyly admires the beautifully crafted piece as the shopkeeper beams. Staring intently at the beautiful trinket, her bright, expressive eyes sparkle vividly with undeniable fascination and quiet longing. Watching her closely from a short distance, a deeply observant Alvis silently notes her absolute, undeniable captivation with the beautiful item. Completely overwhelmed by its delicate charm, she softly murmurs to herself about how incredibly cute the accessory truly is. Shocking her entirely, Lord Alvis steps forward smoothly and decisively orders the eager shopkeeper to wrap the expensive item. Presenting the wrapped gift with a soft, warm smile, he playfully confirms that she genuinely wanted the beautiful hairpin. Highly flustered by his sudden generosity, she stammers a nervous, deeply embarrassed apology as he gently offers the prize. Teasing them good-naturedly, the boisterous shopkeeper loudly insists the handsome boyfriend should intimately place it on her himself. Blushing furiously under the heavy pressure, Alvis awkwardly agrees and tenderly asks if her usual ribbon spot works perfectly. Stepping incredibly close to his beautiful bride, his large, highly capable hands carefully reach toward her soft, dark hair. Time seemingly stops entirely as his gloved fingers expertly and lovingly secure the delicate, sparkling accessory into her silken locks. Beaming with radiant, pure joy, a deeply moved Mikuru profoundly and sincerely thanks Lord Alvis for the incredibly thoughtful gift. Caught completely off guard by her breathtakingly sweet smile, a soft, highly vulnerable gasp sharply escapes his parted lips. Leaning forward with a massive, knowing grin, the loudly energetic shopkeeper fiercely demands the young man actually compliment her. Suddenly, chaotic shouting violently shatters the romantic atmosphere as aggressive, terrifying voices announce a brutal, unexpected street fight. Panicked, highly terrified bystanders scream frantically for the imposing royal knights to quickly intervene and crush the violent brawl. Instantly shifting to his absolute duty, Alvis urgently commands Mikuru to wait safely while he quickly investigates the dangerous commotion. Watching his rapidly retreating back with profound, heavy concern, she softly and earnestly prays for his immediate, absolute safety. A tiny, deeply trembling voice suddenly interrupts her intensely anxious thoughts as a small, terrified child slowly approaches. Looking upward with wide, tear-filled eyes, the highly distressed little boy desperately asks if she has seen his missing dad. Quickly piecing the heartbreaking, deeply tragic situation together, Mikuru realizes the poor, weeping child is completely lost. Trembling with overwhelming, utterly paralyzing fear, the lost boy begins to softly cry as sheer, terrifying panic completely takes hold. Kneeling down gracefully with a warm, immensely comforting smile, she gently promises to bravely help him search for his father. Returning heavily breathless after brutally crushing the chaotic brawl, an exhausted Alvis calls out softly for his beautiful bride. Scanning the completely empty, highly desolate street, dark confusion instantly clouds his sharp features as he entirely fails to spot her. Cold dread immediately violently grips his racing heart as he rapidly realizes she is completely gone from the designated waiting spot. Sprinting furiously through the wildly crowded, highly bustling market, he wildly shouts her beloved name in sheer, escalating panic. Roaring her name with absolute, utterly terrifying desperation, Alvis tears violently through the dense, sprawling royal capital. Pushing himself relentlessly forward, the deeply desperate young noble aggressively shoves past thoroughly startled pedestrians in his frantic search. Violently cursing his own deeply foolish decision, profound, suffocating guilt crushes his soul, forever leaving her completely unprotected. Panting heavily from sheer, absolute physical exhaustion, he forcefully scans the dark, highly imposing alleyways for any trace of her. Darting frantically around a sharp, highly dangerous cobblestone corner, his sharp eyes finally catch a glimpse of a familiar silhouette. Spotting her safely huddled nearby, immense, overwhelming relief violently crashes through his deeply exhausted, visibly trembling body. Peeking cautiously from directly behind a large, highly imposing stranger, Mikuru nervously surveys the tense, heavily shadowed alleyway. Turning abruptly toward the incredibly sudden noise, the massive, highly intimidating stranger glares fiercely at the highly frantic young noble. Misunderstanding the deeply confusing situation entirely, a profoundly enraged Alvis aggressively screams at the terrifying man standing over her. Charging forward with explosive, totally blinding speed, the highly protective heir fiercely prepares to brutally defend his precious wife. Freezing completely in his aggressive tracks, pure, unadulterated bewilderment washes over Alvis as the deeply confused giant merely blinks. Sighing deeply in utter, entirely defeated exasperation, Alvis sharply realizes she simply got horribly lost while bravely helping a child. Trembling with utter confusion, a profoundly lost Mikuru laments her terrible inability to navigate the sprawling capital. Overwhelmed by deep guilt, she furiously scolds herself for causing Lord Alvis an immense amount of trouble. Suddenly slicing through her spiraling panic, a strong, reassuring hand extends gracefully into her peripheral vision. Offering a tender solution, Alvis smoothly suggests that holding hands will completely prevent her from getting lost again. Gasping in sheer shock, her wide eyes snap upward to meet her handsome husband's highly intense gaze. A massive, violent blush instantly explodes across her cheeks as the overwhelming intimacy of his offer fully registers. Stuttering awkwardly, a visibly flustered Alvis hurriedly backpedals by nervously insisting he absolutely will not force her. Shattering the tense hesitation entirely, she eagerly and loudly declares her immediate willingness to hold his hand. Reaching forward with undeniable certainty, her small, delicate fingers wrap securely around his heavily gloved hand. Strolling peacefully through the bustling streets, the reunited couple walks closely side by side with firmly intertwined hands. Reflecting heavily on his uncharacteristic behavior, Alvis completely baffles himself over his own sheer, blinding panic. Desperately rationalizing his racing heart, he strictly insists his intense worry was purely a necessary political calculation. Struggling intensely against his own cold logic, a quiet, nagging hesitation violently shatters his constructed aristocratic excuses. Glancing discreetly downward, a profound wave of raw tenderness washes over him as he acutely notices her small hand. Reflecting quietly on the eventful excursion, Alvis realizes with absolute certainty that today felt profoundly different. A wonderfully bright memory warms his analytical mind as he recalls just how radiantly she smiled today. Succumbing entirely to the overwhelming warmth, a deep, genuine flush softly paints the young noble's stoic features. Continuing their wildly romantic stroll, the completely silent couple savors the deeply peaceful atmosphere of the sprawling capital. Walking proudly together, their tightly linked hands serve as an undeniable anchor amidst the city's chaotic energy. Sitting quietly within the gently swaying carriage, the utterly exhausted couple begins their incredibly peaceful journey back home. Arriving safely under a stunning twilight sky, the majestic Levon estate welcomes the young master and his bride. Slipping quietly into the total privacy of her bedchamber, the heavy wooden door clicks softly shut behind her. Leaning heavily against the solid frame, she clutches her fiercely pounding heart as the overwhelming reality sets in. Collapsing joyfully onto her soft bed, she promises to eternally protect her new hairpin after an amazing day. Mentally composing a highly emotional letter, she warmly recounts exploring the massive royal capital alongside Lord Alvis. Basking fully in the beautiful afterglow, she happily treasures the deeply precious moments they spent entirely side by side. Blushing furiously into her plush pillows, she shyly admits that the wonderful outing felt exactly like a romantic date. Suddenly, a crushing wave of heavy guilt completely annihilates her joy as she tragically remembers her supposed spell. Clenching her tiny fists with unbreakable resolve, she fiercely vows to completely undo the dangerous magical enchantment soon. Time steadily pushes forward as the grand estate seamlessly transitions through a few remarkably peaceful, uneventful passing days. Utter shock violently seizes her delicate features as Alvis abruptly mentions a highly exclusive, massively important upcoming party. Maintaining his fiercely stoic demeanor, Alvis smoothly requests her absolute presence as his official partner at the palace. Snapping slightly out of nervous defensiveness, he instantly regrets aggressively reminding her that she is strictly his fiancée. Trembling slightly under the immense pressure, she nervously questions her own fundamental worthiness to attend such a prestigious event. Panicking wildly about her lack of high society experience, she mentally demands absolute perfection to avoid embarrassing his family. Stepping elegantly out of their polished carriage, the breathtaking architecture of the majestic royal palace fiercely dominates the night. Massive, heavily gilded doors swing dramatically open, instantly revealing a blindingly opulent ballroom dripping with extreme wealth. Staring completely wide-eyed at the dizzying spectacle, the deeply overwhelmed bride struggles to comprehend the elite gathering's sheer scale. Marveling openly at the utterly massive sea of wealthy nobles, her sharp gaze suddenly locks onto Prince Edward. Confirming the royal's exact identity, Alvis sharply directs her attention to the imposing guardian Frederick standing behind the prince. Narrating the dark history of the royal family, a somber voice reveals the reigning king fathered 3 ambitious princes from 3 different mothers. Igniting a bloody succession conflict, the deeply rivalrous mothers fiercely clashed as they ruthlessly fought to forcefully install their own child upon the coveted throne. Tragically claiming the fragile lives of the 2 youngest royal heirs, a highly suspicious wave of sudden illnesses and fatal accidents brutally struck the chaotic palace. Compounding the unadulterated tragedy, the kingdom's eldest heir, a vulnerable 7-year-old Prince Edward, mysteriously vanished without leaving a single discernible trace. Plunging the sprawling royal court into sheer chaos over the missing heirs, Edward's utterly heartbroken mother Rosa tragically succumbed to the severe mental strain. Miraculously turning the dark tide 5 desperate years later, Rosa's determined brother Frederick heroically rescued an amnesiac Edward moments before he was sold into slavery. Serving as the absolute deciding factor, the rescued boy's strikingly unique golden eyes forcefully proved his royal bloodline and instantly restored his status as crown prince. Staring in absolute awe at the highly imposing figure standing gracefully nearby, a stunned Mikuru silently marvels at finally seeing the widely rumored Prince Edward in person. Firmly asserting her reassuring independence, she confidently and proudly assures her fiercely protective husband that she will be perfectly fine waiting alone in the massive crowd. Sharply interrupting their intimate moment, a sharply dressed knight colleague urgently approaches the highly attentive Alvis to quickly discuss a pressing military matter. Stepping reluctantly away with his highly demanding comrade, the intensely protective young master casts a deeply lingering glance back at his beautiful, incredibly nervous young wife. Barking a fiercely strict command over his heavily adorned shoulder, Alvis forcefully orders her to stay completely still and absolutely avoid getting terribly lost again. Handing her a beautifully crafted crystal glass, a deeply graceful palace servant warmly offers the highly anxious, visibly trembling bride a refreshing beverage. Clutching the delicate glass tightly with deeply sweating palms, she anxiously surveys the blindingly opulent ballroom utterly teeming with the massive kingdom's most powerful nobles. A profoundly chilling sensation of heavy scrutiny violently crawls up her frozen spine as she suddenly realizes the incredibly judgmental aristocratic crowd is ruthlessly staring at her. Cruel, intensely biting whispers immediately slice through the heavy air as the fiercely judgmental nobles continuously and maliciously dissect her every single nervous movement. Sneering with absolute venomous contempt, the vicious socialites mockingly dismiss her as a completely unremarkable, entirely uninteresting, purely political arranged bride. Shocking her directly to her intensely fragile core, a loud whisper distinctly claims that the handsome Alvis was recently fiercely romantically involved with the stunning Lady Beatrix. Spiraling violently into absolute crushing despair, she tragically wonders if the unspellbound Alvis secretly harbors profound romantic feelings for his beautiful supposed former lover. Devastating her intensely fragile heart completely, the endlessly gossiping nobles loudly lament the utterly tragic breakup of what they considered an absolutely perfect noble match. Suddenly, an electric, wildly dramatic gasp forcefully sweeps through the crowded ballroom as the breathtakingly beautiful Lady Beatrix flawlessly makes her highly anticipated grand entrance. Stepping supremely confidently into the highly radiant golden light, the stunningly gorgeous noblewoman instantly and forcefully commands the unbroken attention of every single elite guest. A deeply mesmerizing, incredibly sophisticated aura powerfully surrounds her delicate features as she gracefully navigates the quickly parting, entirely awestruck aristocratic crowd. Openly marveling at her sheer undeniable perfection, the utterly enchanted onlookers deeply and loudly praise her flawlessly elegant and completely incomparable striking beauty. Staring in absolute paralyzing terror, a deeply intimidated Mikuru silently and painfully admits that her highly rumored supposed rival is genuinely breathtakingly magnificent. A tremendously heavy, profoundly suffocating wave of extreme, crippling absolute inadequacy violently crashes over the deeply nervous, totally terrified young bride. Desperately clutching her rapidly pounding heart with highly trembling hands, she frantically prays that the devastating romantic gossip is strictly nothing more than a cruel, baseless lie. Relentlessly echoing like a terrifying hammer in her panicked mind, the venomous rumor continues to viciously and aggressively tear apart her heavily guarded, incredibly fragile confidence. Completely shattering her incredibly fragile deep happiness, an intensely sharp wave of pure, completely unadulterated total heartbreak violently consumes her entirely fractured soul. Slumping heavily in total, absolute crushing defeat, she miserably and tragically compares her own simple nature to the impossibly radiant, seemingly perfect aristocratic noblewoman. Taunting her heavily with entirely undeniable visual proof, Beatrix's brilliantly radiant beauty deeply and agonizingly highlights her own deep-seated, terribly painful insecurities. A highly agonizing, entirely soul-destroying mental image of the handsome Alvis and the stunning Beatrix standing flawlessly together deeply torments her completely fragile mind. Hot, heavily stinging tears of sheer, entirely overwhelming utter inadequacy rapidly and completely uncontrollably gather in her deeply sorrowful, intensely emotional eyes. Breaking her incredibly dark, spiraling thoughts completely, a deeply soft, highly unexpected male voice suddenly calls out warmly to the heavily grieving young bride. Stepping incredibly smoothly out of the wildly dizzying elite crowd, a deeply concerned young man politely notes her visibly highly distressed, completely pale complexion. Reaching slowly out with immense quiet grace, he wonderfully and highly thoughtfully offers a pristine white handkerchief to the quietly weeping, completely shocked girl. Sniffling highly softly in sheer absolute surprise, a totally flustered Mikuru deeply thanks the incredibly kind stranger and highly timidly asks for his true name. Bowing incredibly respectfully with profound elegant poise, the deeply mysterious, highly intensely charming young man smoothly and warmly introduces himself entirely as Noah. Dropping an absolute, mind-shattering bombshell, Noah casually reveals that he is actually the personal, highly trusted attendant strictly to the stunning Lady Beatrix. Leaning intimately in with an incredibly tender, completely disarming soft smile, he gently and warmly urges the utterly stunned bride to securely wipe away her freely falling tears. A mysterious figure coldly interrogates the startled Mikuru, demanding to know if her origins trace back to the fabled Roar domain. Acknowledging her hesitant confirmation, the stranger mutters in dark satisfaction while his piercing gaze locks onto her trembling form. Spotting the distinct Eurasian strapped to her wrist, he intensely questions her knowledge of the artifact while panic slowly bubbles in her chest. He menacingly explains that the band is an ancient protective charm native to that specific territory as he steadily closes the distance between them. Delving deeper into the region's lore, he recounts the legend of the enigmatic White Guardian who occasionally manifests with mysterious and powerful abilities. Realizing with a massive spike of dread that he is directly referring to her hidden ability to heal any wound or illness, Mikuru stiffens in absolute terror. Overwhelmed by fragmented memories of being called scary by those she desperately tried to help, her mind spirals into a chaotic storm of deep-seated trauma. The haunting echoes of people calling her creepy and demanding she stay away violently shatter her composure, forcing her to instinctively retreat into herself. Frozen in silent agony, Mikuru stares blankly ahead as the overwhelming weight of her past rejection physically paralyzes her in the otherwise empty hallway. Suddenly, a familiar and comforting voice pierces the heavy silence, calling out Mikuru's name with a desperate and incredibly evident sense of urgency. Lord Alvis rushes to her side and gently apologizes for his absence while she sheepishly admits to fleeing the suffocating pressure of the large crowds. Panting heavily from his frantic search, the young lord catches his breath with his eyes filled with undeniable relief at finally finding her completely unharmed. A heavy, unspoken tension hangs palpably in the air between them as they share a fleeting, breathless moment of vulnerability in the quiet and shadowed corridor. The silent emotional connection deepens as Lord Alvis gazes softly at her, his protective presence momentarily pushing away the dark shadows of her traumatic past. Their intimate quiet is abruptly broken by the ominous arrival of a looming shadow, forcing Alvis to instinctively position himself defensively in front of her. The interrogator smoothly dismisses Alvis's protective stance, cryptically recognizing the young lord as someone closely tied to the well-known Lady Beatrix. With a dismissive smirk plastered on his face, the mysterious man turns on his heel and abruptly takes his leave, leaving a trail of unanswered questions in his wake. Mikuru watches his retreating back in stunned silence, her heart pounding violently against her ribs as the lingering threat slowly dissipates into the chilled air. The heavy atmosphere shatters completely when an energetic girl suddenly bursts onto the scene, loudly demanding to know how to become as cute as Mikuru. Completely blindsided by the absurd and incredibly sudden question, Mikuru lets out a bewildered gasp, entirely unsure of how to process the bizarre shift in tone. Flustered and overwhelmed by the girl's intense and sparkling admiration, Mikuru helplessly averts her eyes while her cheeks burn with a deep, embarrassed flush. She murmurs a soft, non-committal sound, desperately trying to formulate an appropriate response while the energetic girl continues to eagerly invade her personal space. The chaotic and comedic interaction swiftly transitions into a quiet, reflective solitude as Mikuru retreats back to the isolated safety of her private chambers. Standing completely alone in the dimly lit room, the heavy burden of her hidden truth forcefully crashes down upon her fragile shoulders without any warning. Deeply conflicted and deeply sorrowful, she agonizingly rationalizes that Lord Alvis's treasured affection is completely artificial and born solely from her lingering spell. Her heart painfully twists at the crushing thought that the real Lord Alvis might actually harbor genuine, deeply rooted romantic feelings for the elegant Lady Beatrix. Tormented by immense guilt, Mikuru realizes that if his heart truly belongs to another woman, her manipulative magic is nothing more than a cruel and selfish nuisance. Overcome by a suffocating wave of sorrow and profound self-loathing, she lowers her gaze, allowing the bitter truth of her fabricated romance to completely shatter her spirit. Clenching her trembling fists with sudden and incredibly fierce determination, she stubbornly resolves to correct the unnatural emotional bindings she has wrongfully forced upon him. Taking a deep and steadying breath, she forcefully pushes past her own heartbreak, preparing herself mentally and physically to make the ultimate sacrifice for his true happiness. She raises her glowing hands into the silent air, deliberately gathering the shimmering remnants of her unique magical energy to initiate the highly complex reversal process. Focused and incredibly resolute, she channels her inner strength, letting the radiant power pool intensely at her fingertips as the dark room illuminates with an ethereal light. The magical aura surrounding her intensifies rapidly, swirling into a brilliant vortex of blue energy as she fully commits to breaking the artificial bonds of affection. Whispering the ancient, resonant syllables of the reversal chant, she softly speaks the words Rem and Rim, commanding the intricate threads of magic to completely unravel. Directing the surging magical energy specifically toward the spell woven around Lord Alvis's heart, she channels every single ounce of her willpower into dismantling the illusion. The glowing magic flares brightly before violently expanding, creating a massive shockwave of ethereal light that washes over the silent room in a truly breathtaking display. The shimmering particles of the broken spell gently rain down around her like falling stars, visually confirming the highly successful dissolution of his artificial love. With heavy tears welling in her eyes, she quietly pleads into the fading light, desperately hoping that all her unnatural and forced influence has been completely undone. A final, blinding flash of pure magical energy utterly consumes the space, effectively severing the unseen emotional tethers and leaving her standing there utterly drained. Later, entirely oblivious to her massive emotional sacrifice, Lord Alvis tenderly urges the exhausted Mikuru to get some rest, leaving her to softly agree with a bittersweet heart. Noting that he won't even look at her anymore, Mikuru solemnly confirms that he has completely reverted to the original Lord Alvis from before the spell. Clutching her hands tightly near her chest, she forces a melancholic smile while trying to convince herself that she is genuinely glad about the outcome. Standing in complete silence, Alvis casts his gaze downward with an incredibly conflicted and distant expression. His eyes widen slightly as a flurry of deeply troubled thoughts aggressively swirl around his heavy mind. Slowly turning away from his previous spot, he begins to quietly walk down the ornate hallway while completely lost in his own brooding. Internally agonizing over the sudden shift, he desperately wonders why she decided to have the spell completely undone. Staring blankly at the floor as he continues his solitary walk, the absolute undoing of her magic weighs incredibly heavily on his heart. Frustration subtly bleeds into his thoughts as he intensely questions why she chose this exact moment, of all times, to break the magical bond. Remembering that everything seemed perfectly fine before they parted ways, he worriedly agonizes over whether he did something horribly wrong. Attempting to rationalize the painful situation, he tightly grips his head and reminds himself that she is merely an arranged marriage partner to begin with. He desperately tries to convince his breaking heart that her distant behavior is completely natural and that their previous closeness was the true anomaly. The grand architecture of the empty hallway dwarfs his solitary figure as he continues to march forward under the massive emotional burden. Despite his fiercely logical rationalizations, he suddenly stops and clutches his chest while questioning the immense pain tearing through him. Masking his inner turmoil with a perfectly stoic face, he formally informs a nearby servant that he is heading out for a bit on business. Stepping outside into the daylight, Alvis completely fails to suppress the agonizing ache in his chest, silently pleading to know why it hurts this much. Meanwhile, Mikuru sits completely alone in the heavy, suffocating silence of her dimly lit room. Staring vacantly ahead, she quietly processes the massive, life-altering sacrifice she just made for his perceived happiness. She solemnly acknowledges that by forcefully breaking the spell, her relationship with Lord Alvis has permanently returned to its original, frigid state. Grasping the door handle with a heavy heart, she stubbornly tries to convince herself that this emotional distance is exactly the way it is supposed to be. The solemn atmosphere instantly shatters when an incredibly loud commotion aggressively erupts just outside her chamber doors. Startled by the sudden disturbance, she looks up with wide eyes as the metal door handle begins to violently rattle. The heavy door suddenly flies wide open, revealing a highly energetic woman bursting into the room with unstoppable momentum. Panicking intensely, Mikuru immediately assumes this fierce intruder must be the rumored Lady Beatrix arriving to aggressively complain about their arranged engagement. Completely ignoring all personal boundaries, the intense woman instantly closes the distance and tightly grasps both of Mikuru's hands. Blushing furiously with sparkling eyes, Beatrix enthusiastically screams Miss Mikuru's name while declaring how incredibly happy she is to finally meet her. Lord Alvis suddenly storms into the room right behind her, furiously demanding to know what the hell Beatrix is doing barging into his fiancée's chambers. Utterly exasperated by the chaotic intrusion, Alvis angrily shouts Beatrix's name at the top of his lungs. Firing back with equal ferocity, Beatrix angrily argues that barging in was her only option since Alvis stubbornly refused to let her meet Lady Mikuru. Utterly bewildered by their informal and chaotic bickering, Mikuru tentatively stammers that the atmosphere between them feels completely off. Gathering her courage, she cautiously asks if the two of them were actually seeing each other romantically before this arranged marriage, just like the rumors suggested. Both Alvis and Beatrix freeze instantly, simultaneously letting out incredibly loud gasps of sheer, unadulterated shock. Quickly regaining her professional composure, Beatrix properly introduces herself as a fellow knight who belongs to the exact same order as Lord Alvis. Alvis vehemently crushes the romantic gossip, sternly declaring that she is absolutely just a colleague and that no such romantic relationship exists. Pinching the bridge of his nose in utter defeat, Alvis groans heavily while wondering who on earth among the knights could have spread such a ridiculous rumor. Dropping a massive, unexpected bombshell, Alvis casually reveals that the person Beatrix actually likes is her very own attendant, Noah. Stunned by the sudden revelation, Mikuru instantly pictures the face of the quiet attendant she met recently. Beatrix excitedly confirms the connection, noting that she specifically watched Mikuru talking happily with Noah during the recent party. Admitting that her entire life has been consumed by martial arts, Beatrix deeply confesses her burning desire to become a lovely, elegant woman just like Mikuru. Leaning in with an incredibly intense glare, Beatrix loudly declares that she is asking for a massive, life-changing favor. Practically begging with absolute desperation, Beatrix intensely demands to know how she can get Noah to finally see her as a woman. Lifting the flustered girl's chin with an intense gaze, Beatrix earnestly begs Mikuru to please teach her the ways of romance. Overwhelmed by the sudden physical closeness and sheer intensity, Mikuru stammers out a nervous gasp in pure shock. Blushing furiously, Mikuru timidly agrees to help if someone like her is truly acceptable, prompting a joyful cheer of gratitude. Offering a casual apology to the exasperated Alvis, the energetic female knight cheerfully announces her departure and heads home. Watching Beatrix leave, a deeply exhausted Alvis sighs heavily and admits that this chaotic outcome is exactly why he tried keeping them apart. He anxiously questions if Mikuru is absolutely sure about committing to this favor, prompting her to sheepishly admit her lack of confidence in teaching anything. Standing quietly in the elegant hallway, she lowers her gaze while deeply contemplating the massive responsibility she just accepted. Clutching her chest with a melancholic expression, she silently empathizes with the painful desire of wanting a beloved person to finally notice you. Suddenly snapping out of her gloomy thoughts, she turns to Alvis and curiously asks if his earlier business matters were resolved all right. She presses further with genuine confusion, wondering why he returned so incredibly soon when he originally claimed to be heading out for work. Caught completely off guard by her direct questioning, Alvis flinches slightly and averts his gaze with a deeply flustered expression. Producing a beautifully wrapped package seemingly out of nowhere, he silently presents it to her, causing her eyes to widen at the sight of cake. He softly explains that the exquisite sweet treat was specially procured from a highly popular and renowned shop located in the capital. Utterly speechless at the incredibly thoughtful gesture, she stares at the beautifully decorated box while her heart violently pounds in her chest. Watching her overwhelmed reaction, Alvis quietly berates himself internally for being a massive fool who seemingly misunderstood everything between them. Realizing the heavy emotional tension, she frantically stammers that he has it all wrong, desperately trying to correct the lingering misunderstandings. Letting out a shaky breath of immense relief, the palpable awkwardness between the arranged couple slowly begins to dissipate into the quiet air. Breaking the comfortable silence, Alvis glances out the nearby window and softly remarks on the shifting seasonal weather. Noting the dropping temperature, he gently points out that despite the arrival of spring, the evening nights still remain surprisingly chilly. A crisp, cool breeze gently blows through the grand estate, silently confirming his observation as the evening shadows slowly lengthen. Turning back to face her with an incredibly soft and tender expression, he gently calls out her name and suggests they finally head back inside. Offering her a genuinely warm and inviting smile, he softly urges her to follow him back to the comforting warmth of their shared quarters. Following closely behind him with the precious cake box in hand, Mikuru feels a massive wave of overwhelming happiness completely flood her fragile heart. She joyfully realizes that he specifically went out of his way to buy this gift because he remembered how much she enjoyed sweets at the cafe. Rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly, he shyly confesses that he was deeply worried because she had seemed incredibly down lately. Touched by his profound sincerity and deep observation, she softly apologizes for causing him any unnecessary worry with her melancholic behavior. He nervously brings up the recent social gathering, straightforwardly asking if his actions during the party had inadvertently hurt her feelings. Admitting his own social shortcomings, he earnestly promises that even though he struggles to read the mood, he wants to do much better from now on. Looking directly into her eyes with burning sincerity, the young lord firmly declares that he will make a genuine effort to understand her better. Absolutely moved by his heartfelt and deeply vulnerable confession, her eyes sparkle with unshed tears as an undeniable warmth blossoms in her chest. A profound sense of relief washes entirely over her, thrilling her with the realization that she is finally able to talk naturally with Lord Alvis again. Sitting together in peaceful harmony, she takes a delicate bite of the luxurious dessert and happily praises its incredibly delicious flavor. Watching her face light up with pure joy as she enjoys the sweet treat, a remarkably soft and affectionate gaze settles comfortably over his features. Suddenly noticing a small smudge of frosting, he leans in closely and casually points out that she has a bit of cream stuck on her cheek. Without a single moment of hesitation, he gently reaches out and intimately wipes the stray cream from her flushed skin with his thumb. The sudden and incredibly intimate physical contact instantly sends a massive jolt of electricity straight through her rapidly beating heart. Suddenly realizing the incredibly bold nature of his impulsive action, a deep crimson blush violently explodes across the young lord's flustered face. Staring at his affectionately embarrassed reaction, a terrifyingly sharp realization suddenly pieces through her previous veil of overwhelming happiness. Panic aggressively grips her very soul as she mentally screams, dreading the horrific possibility that her manipulative love spell hasn't actually been broken yet. Sitting alone at her desk later that night, she nervously picks up a pen to draft a highly conflicted letter addressed to her distant mother and father. Enjoying a temporary change of scenery, Mikuru reveals she is currently visiting a breathtakingly luxurious villa resort. Taking in the grand architecture, she acknowledges that this massive estate actually belongs to the energetic Lady Beatrix. Beatrix nervously admits she invited them along because being completely alone on vacation with Noah makes her incredibly anxious. Sighing heavily, Alvis gently chides Mikuru by stating she really didn't have to force herself to accept such an awkward request. Feeling the cool wind brush against her face, Mikuru appreciates the refreshing breeze while silently grappling with her inner doubts. Suddenly, a booming voice shatters her peaceful thoughts as Beatrix excitedly shouts her name across the sunny courtyard. Bounding over with a massive smile, the female knight warmly welcomes them and expresses her genuine joy that they actually came. Wasting absolutely no time, Beatrix eagerly suggests going for a long horseback ride the moment they set down their heavy luggage. Panicking slightly, Mikuru stammers that she has never ridden before, prompting Beatrix to cheerfully declare that Alvis will expertly teach her. Pinching the bridge of his nose in sheer resignation, Alvis reluctantly mutters that he supposes he has no other choice. Stepping forward with practiced grace, the polite attendant Noah smoothly offers to take their luggage directly to their respective rooms. Blushing furiously, Beatrix violently thrusts a freshly cleaned handkerchief toward Noah while loudly thanking him for his previous kindness. Moving toward the stables, Alvis gently guides a nervous Mikuru and calmly instructs her on exactly where to place her foot. Promising to fully support her shifting weight, he softly urges her to take the mounting process as slowly as she needs. Letting out a startled squeak of absolute terror, Mikuru awkwardly hoists herself up onto the back of the massive steed. With Alvis pressed flush against Mikuru for safety, a wildly flustered Beatrix stammers out a suggestion that Noah should try riding too. Completely oblivious to her massive romantic panic, Noah offers a gentle smile and calmly agrees that galloping on horseback is incredibly fun. With everyone finally mounted, the small group sets off at a steady pace along the beautifully scenic woodland trails. Whispering quietly so the others cannot hear over the clopping hooves, Mikuru cautiously calls out to Lord Alvis. Leaning back slightly, she softly asks if they could somehow speed up and leave the other two entirely alone. Catching onto her clever wingman's strategy instantly, Alvis sharply tightens his grip on the leather reins with a determined smirk. Shouting that they will scout ahead, Alvis violently kicks his horse into a rapid sprint, leaving a completely bewildered Beatrix eating their dust. Startled by the abrupt and rapid departure, Beatrix loudly yells after Alvis in pure, unadulterated shock. As the wind violently whips past them, Alvis loudly shouts over the rushing air to ask if the terrifying speed is okay for her. Clinging desperately to the front of the saddle, Mikuru mentally admits that the breakneck speed isn't actually her primary concern. Her heart pounds wildly against her ribs as she painfully realizes a massive, undeniable difference compared to their previous interactions. Blushing violently, she becomes acutely and overwhelmingly aware that his broad chest is pressed incredibly close against her back. The powerful steed continues to thunder aggressively across the open landscape, carrying them further into the secluded wilderness. Eventually pulling back on the reins, Alvis slows their frantic pace and brings the exhausted horse to a gentle, steady halt. Scanning the deeply quiet surroundings, he calmly notes that since they have come this far, they should be perfectly fine for a while. He gently leans forward and asks if she is tired, prompting her to quickly and defensively insist that she is completely fine. Looking around the dense foliage, he suggests they should probably dismount and find a fresh water source nearby. Watching his incredibly considerate demeanor, Mikuru's chest tightens as she sadly reflects on how kind Lord Alvis is acting toward her today. A crushing wave of guilt violently washes over her as she deduces that her manipulative love charm absolutely hasn't worn off yet. Determined to fix this unnatural bond, she decides she must verbally explain the magic even if he vehemently refuses to believe her. Gathering every last ounce of her fleeting courage, she softly calls out his name to initiate the incredibly difficult confession. Suddenly, the peaceful silence violently shatters as a hidden threat deeply spooks their horse, causing it to aggressively rear up. Caught completely off guard by the massive vertical shift, Mikuru lets out a breathless gasp of pure, paralyzing shock. Screaming in absolute terror, she loses her fragile grip and begins dangerously slipping from the saddle as the crazed horse panics. Lunging forward with desperate speed, Alvis frantically shouts for the terrified animal to stop before she plummets to the hard ground. Stirring from unconsciousness with a soft groan, Mikuru slowly opens her eyes as Alvis desperately calls out her name. Letting out a heavy sigh of sheer relief, Lord Alvis tenderly holds her and thanks goodness that she is finally awake. Suddenly remembering the terrifying accident, Mikuru frantically asks about the horse as Alvis deduces an old tree had unexpectedly fallen in their path. Surveying their dense surroundings, Alvis grimly notes that they have wandered quite deep into the unfamiliar mountain forest. Frustrated by the identical foliage, he admits he cannot even tell which direction they originally came from. To make matters even worse, a sudden drop of water hits Mikuru's face as a heavy downpour rapidly begins to blanket the woods. Spotting a secluded mountain cabin through the thick rain, Alvis quickly suggests they take shelter inside for a while. Stepping into the dusty interior, Alvis gently sets her down and asks her to wait for a moment while he inspects the room. Scanning the rustic shelter, his sharp eyes immediately lock onto a sturdy stone fireplace sitting quietly in the corner. Relieved by the sudden stroke of luck, he excitedly announces that he found dry firewood and flint to start a warming fire. Striking the flint with practiced precision, he quickly coaxes a bright, crackling flame to life within the cold hearth. The warm, golden light dances across their damp clothes as they sit closely together on the wooden floor. Feeling the comforting heat wash over her chilled body, Mikuru softly marvels at how incredibly warm the roaring fire feels. A thick, heavy silence suddenly descends upon the tiny room as the reality of their extremely intimate situation sets in. Blushing furiously, Mikuru internally panics upon realizing that she is completely alone with him in a quiet mountain cabin. When Alvis gently asks if she is still feeling cold, she practically shouts her gratitude in a highly flustered panic. Desperately trying to alleviate the awkwardness, Mikuru apologizes for her strange suggestion while Alvis blames his own lack of caution. Despite their mutual apologies, another suffocating wave of silence aggressively chokes the tiny, firelit room. Frustrated by her own intense shyness, Mikuru mentally screams as she completely fails to keep any sort of conversation going. Her heart violently pounds against her ribs as she agonizingly questions why she ended up sitting so incredibly close to him. Suddenly breaking the tension, Alvis silently reaches out and gently places his large hand directly over hers. Startled by the sudden touch, she lets out a small gasp before he softly retracts his hand and apologizes for the misunderstanding. Staring at her flushed face with deep concern, he earnestly asks if she is feeling unwell or suffering from a fever. Pushed to her absolute emotional limit, she tightly grips her clothes and softly confesses that her heart has been pounding non-stop since the horse ride. Trembling with vulnerability, she admits that the overwhelming proximity to Lord Alvis is causing her chest to ache. Tears prick her eyes as she fully exposes her intense embarrassment, admitting that her face is burning red and her heartbeat is deafeningly loud. Unable to bear his intense gaze any longer, she turns her head away and desperately begs him not to look at her. Utterly stunned by her incredibly raw and honest confession, Alvis stares at her trembling form with wide, mesmerized eyes. Drawn in by an undeniable, magnetic pull, Alvis slowly leans his face intimately closer to her flushed cheek. The crackling fire softly illuminates his handsome features as he closes his eyes and tilts his head for a tender kiss. Startled by the rapidly closing distance, Mikuru breathlessly whispers his name into the incredibly tense air. Completely overcome by his surging emotions, he firmly grasps her delicate shoulders and pulls her flush against his chest. Their breaths mingle in the quiet cabin as he intensely closes the final agonizing inches between their trembling lips. Suddenly, the romantic tension violently shatters as a massive, echoing crash violently erupts from outside the cabin walls. Snapping back to harsh reality, Mikuru aggressively shoves herself away from his embrace with a look of pure terror. Gripping her chest tightly, she mentally agonizes that this romantic progression is absolutely not okay yet. A crushing wave of guilt violently washes over her as she painfully remembers that her manipulative love charm is still in full effect. The heavy wooden door violently flies open as a soaked Beatrix and Noah frantically burst into the room shouting their names. Spotting the two sitting by the fire, Beatrix lets out a massive cheer of relief at finally locating the missing pair. Stepping into the warm light, Noah calmly explains they immediately set out to search when the rain started and the pair didn't return. Startled by the tense atmosphere, the cloaked girl stammers while her companions wonder if the young man truly understands what just happened. Heavy rain violently lashes against the sprawling stone architecture of a massive, isolated mansion caught in the raging storm. Smiling warmly from the staircase, the elegant female host praises the incredibly delicious dinner prepared by their resident chef. Blushing fiercely, the blonde girl pants in relief while the dark-haired boy nervously notes their narrow escape. Throwing open the grand double doors, the elegant host presents a luxurious bedroom for the two of them to share. Hoping they still enjoy the trip despite getting soaked in the storm, she receives polite and eager agreement from the anxious boy. Awe quickly morphs into pure panic as the blonde girl realizes they are expected to sleep in this massive room together. Turning abruptly toward the doorway, the dark-haired boy calls out to their retreating host to stop her. Completely bewildered by the unexpected arrangement, he demands to know why they are being forced to share the exact same room. Fixing him with a sharp gaze, the woman sternly questions if sharing a room is some kind of problem for an engaged couple. Staring intensely with eyes completely free of doubt, her sheer confidence leaves the young couple absolutely stunned into silence. Brushing off their visible hesitation with a cheerful farewell, the host bids them good night and promises to see them tomorrow. The heavy door clicks shut, leaving the young man stepping forward to stammer out a frantic question to the empty space. Stranded in the middle of the opulent bedroom, the fake couple stands completely frozen in an incredibly awkward silence. Internal panic sets in as they realize they have never slept in the same room alone, let alone shared a single bed. The girl's mind races dizzily as she remembers the intensely intimate moment that almost happened between them earlier. Shattering the thick tension, the boy steps forward and decisively unclasps his dark leather suitcase on the furniture. Chivalrously taking charge of the situation, he firmly insists that she take the bed while he uses the sofa. Jolted by his sudden and selfless sacrifice, the blonde girl stares back at him with wide and incredibly shocked eyes. Reminding her she hasn't recovered from the earlier ordeal, he effortlessly shoots down her nervous offer to take the sofa instead. Bowing her head timidly, she stammers a quiet apology and gently accepts his heartfelt kindness. Left entirely to her own spiraling thoughts, the girl gazes silently out the dark, rain-streaked window. Suddenly, jagged forks of brutal lightning illuminate the stormy sky right outside the large glass panes. A terrifying crack of thunder sends her diving deep under the thick blankets with a frightened, high-pitched shriek. Trembling under the covers with tears welling in her eyes, she whimpers that the dreaded thunderstorm has finally begun. Heavy rain relentlessly batters the dark estate as a stormy night unfolds. Inside the dimly lit room, an ominous silence stretches between the booming claps of thunder. A sudden, violent flash of lightning dramatically illuminates the dark bedroom where Miku cowers on the bed. Lord Alvis rushes into the room with deep concern, gently asking if Miku is okay after hearing her terrified scream. Trembling beneath the thick covers, a terrified Miku tearfully apologizes and admits she simply cannot handle the booming thunder. Tears rapidly well up in Miku's wide eyes as she shivers in absolute, paralyzing fear from the relentless storm. Lord Alvis gazes toward the window, grimly noting that the fierce rain likely won't stop for a while. Gently wrapping his arms around her trembling form, Lord Alvis softly asks if his comforting embrace makes things a little better. Blushing deeply against his chest, Miku stammers a quiet, hesitant agreement to his soothing question. Lord Alvis settles firmly onto the bed, holding the frightened girl tightly against him as the storm rages outside. Acting purely on protective instinct, Lord Alvis securely presses his hands over her ears to muffle the terrifying thunder. Feeling his incredibly large hands envelop her, Miku realizes her own heartbeat is starting to pound loudly against her ribs. Gazing up at his deeply worried expression, Miku nervously wonders if what happened before will suddenly happen again. Misinterpreting her intense gaze, Lord Alvis immediately apologizes and gently asks if she is still scared. Wide-eyed and utterly breathless, Miku stares up at the handsome nobleman in complete, stunned silence. She suddenly realizes she feels significantly calmer now because his overwhelming presence distracts her from the raging storm. Lord Alvis fixes her with an intensely quiet, smoldering gaze that completely melts away the lingering tension in the room. Without another word of warning, Lord Alvis leans forward and passionately captures Miku's lips in a breathtaking kiss. Mika's eyes widen in sheer, unadulterated shock as the sudden romantic gesture catches her completely off guard. Pulling back slightly, a flushed Lord Alvis swiftly apologizes and admits he couldn't think of any other way to help her. Flustered and blushing furiously, Miku stammers out a yes as Alvis sincerely hopes the bold kiss distracted her at least a little. Wrapped securely in his warm arms, Miku realizes that at that exact moment, the terrifying sound of the thunder completely faded away. A sudden, panic-inducing realization intensely washes over the trembling girl regarding the mysterious magical charm. Cold dread violently pools in her stomach as she shockingly realizes that the spell hasn't been lifted at all. Caught entirely in a frantic whirlwind of rising panic and pounding heartbeats, Mika desperately wonders what she should do next.